Hope all is well. So we're continuing our Indisputable Truth Book Series. We are on page 95 in the third edition of the book. So we're basically discussing rabbinical laws. We're talking about that whole idea. We're asking the question, why listen to the rabbis? So many people, they ask, why should I listen to the rabbis? The Torah tells us to do this, the Torah tells us to do that. Like, I'm going to listen to the Torah. I'm not going to listen to the rabbis. Why should I listen to the rabbis? So that's the topic we were discussing in the last class. And we basically said, why listen to the rabbis? Well, why? Why should we listen to them? Because the Torah says to listen to them. And we brought the source. I'm not going to read it inside like we did last time, but it's Deuteronomy chapter 17, where basically that verse and Ezekiel chapter 44 tells you that Hashem, in regards to Torah law, Hashem, gave permission to the rabbis if there's a case that we have a doubt about that case, we don't know what to do. He basically told the Sanhedrin, the Jewish court, the Supreme Court, if there's a doubt, you guys will based off your voting, if the majority vote, let's say for example kosher or not kosher, they're trying to figure out if something's kosher or not kosher. You go to the Sanhedrin would take a vote. If the majority vote kosher, what happens? That's ruled as kosher, and that's what Hashem goes in heaven. Hashem says, okay, whatever Sanhedrin goes, I go. So if they say it's kosher, it's kosher. If it's not, it's not. Meaning, there's a case that there's a doubt about it. Obviously, if it's a case where it's an obvious case, they can't change the rules. But in a case of doubt, then they come in and we have to listen to them. That's what the Torah says. Okay? So now we're talking about the idea that not only does Hashem give permission to the rabbis to decide on certain cases of Torah law when there's a doubt, but he also gave permission to the rabbis to preserve the Torah. Now, that's what we call rabbinical laws. So what are rabbinical laws? Rabbinical laws are basically laws where they're like fences around the Torah. Okay, so I'll give you a quick example. We'll give examples like you can't eat, dairy and chicken together. So the Torah says you can't eat meat and dairy, meaning like red meat, like beef or like goats or whatever, stuff like that. But to eat chicken and dairy, according to the Torah, is 100% fine. So why don't we eat chicken and dairy? Because God wrote in the Torah what? God says, why don't we eat chicken and dairy? Because the rabbis came, the Sanhedrin, not all rabbis nowadays, I'm talking about the Sanhedrin thousands of years ago, which again, obviously Hashem appointed the Supreme Court, right, through all the prophets of every generation. And they said, listen, people are mixing up chicken and dairy. So, because chicken looks like red meat, it kind of looks like meat, it looks like red meat, a little bit. Obviously not color-wise, but sometimes just the texture and the taste and everything, it looks the same. So people might eat chicken and dairy and say, oh, I'm eating chicken and dairy, that's meat, this is meat, so why can't I eat regular meat? And they're going to violate a Torah law. So they made a fence around the Torah that you can eat chicken and dairy, that's a rabbinical law, in order to prevent you from violating a Torah law of eating meat and dairy. Which again, it's very, very practical. I'll give you another example. On Shabbat, you're not allowed to write. One of the 39 malachot is you can't write. 39 acts of creation, right? Writing is one of them. So Hashem says you can't write. That's a Torah law. Now the rabbis came, the Sanhedrin, and they said, listen, if you're able to pick up a pen, you know what's going to happen? You're going to be playing around, you're going to holding the pen in your hand, and you might forget that it's Shabbat and you're going to write. So we're making a fence. A fence is called mukseh. Mukseh means set aside. That you're not even allowed to touch the pen in a normal way. You can do it with your elbows, you can blow on the pen. That way, in an abnormal way, you're not going to forget because that's kind of like a reminder. But you can't pick up a pen normally on Shabbat. Why? Because you might accidentally write. So they made a rabbinical law called mukseh. You can't pick up the pen in a normal way in order to prevent you from violating a Torah law of writing. Okay? And we read the verse in Ezekiel where God basically said that Hashem writes in Ezekiel chapter 44 verse 24 that in disagreements they shall act as judges, they shall decide in accordance with my laws, so that's with the Torah laws, and also he says they shall preserve my Torah and its laws. So God writes, I want the Sanhedrin not only to determine Torah law, but I also want them to preserve Torah law, like by making these fences, okay? I'll give you another verse that just goes into this idea, okay? Moses tells the Jewish people, so this, I think we read this last time, I'm just going to repeat it again, in Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 15 to 20, Moses tells the Jewish people that what? A prophet among you from your brothers like me shall, so God, I'm going to interpret each verse. So God says, so let's continue reading. A prophet among you, from your brothers like me, shall Hashem your God establish for you. You shall listen to him, according to all that you asked Hashem your God in Horeb in Mount Sinai, on the day of the gathering, saying, I can no longer hear the voice of Hashem, my God, and and let me no longer see this great fire, so that I will not die. Then Hashem said to me, they have done well in what they have said. And then Moses says that God told him, I will set up a prophet for them among their brothers, like you, like Moses. Okay, and I will put my words into his mouth, and he shall speak to them all that I command him. And it will be that whoever does not listen to my words that he, the prophet, speaks in my name, I will exact of him. Meaning, God's going to kill him. I will kill him. Meaning, I will exact of him means I will kill him. But the prophet who intentionally speaks a word in my name, which I did not command him to speak, or who speaks in the name of other gods, that prophet shall die. So what do we see from this verse? We see that the Jewish people told Moses, it's too much for us to get the Torah. We can't handle it. On Mount Sinai, God said the first 2 of the 10 commandments. Some say all 10, some say the first 2. And before he was going to give them the entire Torah, all the 613 and everything, the Jews said, listen, we heard just some of the mitzvot, the 2 of the 10 commandments is too much for us. Moses, now that we know you're the man, you're legit, you're the OG, I want you to go. Basically, the Jewish people told Moses, you go up to the mountain and bring down the Torah. We know you're legit. God put his stamp in front of all of us. He basically said Moses is the man, right? So you go up and bring the rest of the Torah. So that's the context of what's going on. So God's basically saying that to Moses that you guys, the Jewish people, you guys asked for, instead of me giving you the entire Torah, for the prophets to bring it down. So Hashem says, don't worry though. In every generation, I'll make sure there's a prophet who's going to bring down my word. Because in every generation, we have millions of people. Not everybody's on the level to speak to Hashem. So there's certain people who are on the level to speak. That's what we call the prophets. And I'm going to put that and establish for you in every generation. Okay? And they're gonna be among their brothers. So obviously a Jewish prophet like you, like Moses. Just like Moses was the leader and he was the head of the Sanhedrin and everything. So there's gonna be a prophet like Moses in every generation. Okay? Meaning not on the level of Moses' prophecy, obviously, because he's the greatest prophet. We'll talk about that later. But the idea of that there's going to be a prophet in every generation, a leader, and I will put my words into his mouth. God is going to communicate to them messages that he wants the nation to know at that time. So in every generation, Isaiah, Ezekiel, Zechariah, all these prophets. And he will speak to them all I command him. So God's going to tell the prophet in every generation, okay, Mr. Prophet, I want you to tell the Jewish people this message. I want you to tell the Jewish people that message. That's the idea of, that's what the prophet would do. Okay? And God says, and whoever doesn't listen to the prophet, he's done. He's out. We call it chayv mita. He's done. Why? Because you're disconnecting yourself from Hashem. If you don't want to talk to Hashem's messengers, you don't want to talk to Hashem. You don't want to talk to God Himself. Okay? Now, God also warns us. We might say, but how do we know this prophet is legit or not? So God, first of all, in Deuteronomy, He gives us all the criteria of who's a real and who's a fake prophet. We also understand the idea that once Moses is a legitimate prophet and God chose him in front of everybody, so that established prophecy for every other prophet coming after him. Joshua, then the judges, and then Shmuel, and then whatever, all these other prophets after him. Because once one prophet is legit, he could put his, it's called smicha. He basically tells everybody this next prophet is legit because so once Moses is legit and everyone knows he's legit, he could appoint the next guy and everyone knows the next guy is legit because Moses was legit. Whatever. Long story, we'll talk about that later. But the idea is, whoever doesn't listen, Hashem said. But now, but the prophet, someone who claims, but he's talking about a prophet here, but the prophet who intentionally speaks a word in my name that I did not command him. Imagine a prophet says, you know what, I don't want to listen to God. God told me this, but I'm going to tell the Jewish people another thing. God promises us, don't worry, that will never happen. Why? Because if he does, okay, that prophet shall die. Or either he doesn't speak to him what I told him, or he speaks in the name of other gods. He tries getting you to go to do idolatry and other, basically veer off Judaism and keep other things, right? That prophet shall die. So God basically says in the Torah that I promise you, always have a leader in every generation, a prophet, someone who's going to tell you my word, right? And that also applies to nowadays. Now we don't have prophets like we did back then until 2,000 years ago, until the the Tanakh. Malachi was the last prophet in the Tanakh. Right? Obviously, there's other prophets and whatever, but he was the last official one in the canonization of the written law. But the idea is that Hashem will put leaders in every generation because He's not going to leave His sheep without a shepherd. Meaning that we're His nation. We have to have leaders in every generation, and we know the Jewish people from day one. We always had something called what we call gedolim. Gedolim are the big rabbis. Gedolim are the leaders of every single generation who basically guide us, who tell us, who give us, they're like the Sanhedrin of the generation in a sense. They guide us in the right path. If we don't know Torah law, we go, there are a few names like Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, Rav Chaim Kanievsky, the Chazon Ish, right? Different, leaders. But okay, fine. That's the verse. We finished the verse. We see from here that God tells Moses that he will make sure, and I know I read this last time, but whatever, just repeat it again because we're in the middle of a subject, and I don't want when I read the next stuff that the next topic that you're not gonna you're not gonna know what's going on. So I'm just repeating it. We see from here that God clearly tells Moses that he will make sure that he will have prophets who will tell us what he wants to do. The prophets of each generation were our chief rabbis and leaders. Not only this, but God tells us if a real prophet decided to command us to do things that God did not tell him, the prophet will die. So we don't have to worry about if someone coming and faking everything. Therefore, for these reasons, we can trust the prophets of previous generations, and we must listen to them. Why do we have to listen to them? Because God said so. Okay, good. Now, here is a verse in the written Torah where the Sanhedrin is commanded to make protective laws where they deem it necessary. Okay, so we understand Torah law, how the Sanhedrin is able to rule on Torah law and cases in Torah law and determine what's the right thing. Okay, but what about rabbinical laws? Who gave them permission to make laws? So again, like I said, it was God. We read the verses. God says whatever they tell you, don't steer right or left. And I'll show you a verse. God says in Leviticus 18:30. Okay, and you shall safeguard my charge, which is referring to the Torah, to ensure that you will not do any of the abominable practices that were done before you, nor become defiled by them. I am Hashem your God. So what does it mean to safeguard? What does that mean? God commanded the rabbis of Sanhedrin to make fences around the commandments of the Torah in order to protect them from being violated. Okay, so that's the idea. Additionally, the men of the Great Assembly said three things in Perkei Avot. This is what the oral Torah tells us. The oral Torah tells us that in Perkei Avot, be patient. It's talking about to the Sanhedrin. Be patient in administration of justice, meaning when you're deciding cases in court. Develop many students, right? It says ha'amidu. Ha'amidu means make independent students. Have a lot of students, make them independent. And it says make a fence around the Torah. Okay, because if you don't make fences around the Torah, that's it. The Torah is going to be done. And we'll explain what that means. Many people confuse the idea of a fence with adding to the Torah. Now, the Torah clearly says that a person is not allowed to add or subtract. So a lot of people say, oh, how can rabbis make laws? The Torah says you can't add or subtract to the Torah. That's a great question. But I'll tell you why it's not adding to the Torah. The Torah clearly says itself that a person is not allowed to add or subtract from it. On the other hand, in the case of rabbinical laws, the situation is different. Instead, rabbinical laws were not coming to add or subtract to the Torah, since they were designed to protect the existing laws of the Torah. Now, what does that mean, adding or subtracting to the Torah? That means, for example, let's say on Sukkot, you're supposed to get a lulav and etrog. If I come and say, I don't want to use the etrog, let's use an orange, that's adding or subtracting to the Torah. If I come and say, you know what, Yom Kippur, let's make Yom Kippur 2 days, that's adding or subtracting to the Torah. Yom Kippur is 1 day, it's not 2 days. Now, you might ask, whoever's listening, well, don't we keep 2 days of holidays outside of Israel? Everyone in Israel keeps 1 day and people who live outside of Israel 2 days. Well, the idea is what? That the first day is from the Torah, but we never say, for example, let's say, Rosh Hashanah, right? Rosh Hashanah is 2 days. The first day is from the Torah. The second day of Rosh Hashanah is not Torah, it's rabbinical. So if you said it's Torah, then you're right, you're adding or subtracting. But if you say it's rabbinical and it's a fence, again, obviously to the idea of the calendars, they made it in the diaspora 2 days because based off the calendars, they didn't know which day it was, so they wanted to be secure just in case they missed a day. They had 2 days, whatever. That's a whole process in itself and a whole story in of itself. But the idea is, if they said, oh, we're making a second day for Pesach, so there's only 1 day of Yom Tov of the holiday, but let's make it 2 days. Right? Then you're adding and subtracting. But they never said that. They always said the second day is rabbinical fence. It's just to make sure that based off the calendar and different people living in different areas, that people won't mistakenly celebrate the wrong days to have an extra day to just play it safe. Okay? But it's a fence. It was always a fence at the end of the day to protect us from violating Torah laws. So, for example, we know there's a rabbinical law. I know I just mentioned this, but let's read it again. For example, we know there's a rabbinic law from the Sanhedrin to not eat poultry with dairy. But the Torah only tells us that, basically red meat, the meats I mentioned before, is forbidden to eat with dairy. Okay? The rabbis instituted the law of not eating chicken with dairy because the meat of chicken is similar to regular meat, and people would mistakenly eat regular meat with dairy thinking that they're only eating poultry. So in order to prevent a Torah law from being broken, God commanded the rabbis of the Sanhedrin to make fences when necessary. So again, it's not that the rabbis are coming making up stuff. God is the one who told the rabbis, make a safeguard around my Torah, protect my Torah. My Torah law is going to be violated. So they're not adding and subtracting, they're actually listening to God. They're listening to God. But if they said these rabbinical laws are Torah laws, that's adding or subtracting to the Torah. So, for example, Purim and Hanukkah, those are rabbinical holidays. If you said, if you don't celebrate Hanukkah, you're violating the Torah, boom, out. That's adding or subtracting, you violated a sin from the Torah. But if you say, no, it's a rabbinic holiday, it's not a Torah holiday, you're not adding or subtracting to the Torah. Right? Same thing with Purim. Same thing with Nitilat Yadayim, washing your hands before you eat bread and before your meal. Right? The idea is that those are all rabbinical laws, and if you say the rabbinical laws are Torah laws, you're adding and subtracting. But if you just say, no, these are rabbinical laws, these are the fences only, and these are not the actual Torah laws, you're not adding or subtracting. That's the distinction. Okay? So, in order to prevent Torah law from being broken, God commanded the rabbis of the Sanhedrin to make fences when necessary. Again, like I proved in all those verses from the written Torah and the oral Torah. However, if the rabbis came and said that eating dairy with poultry is a new commandment from the Torah itself, then that falls under the category of adding or subtracting to the Torah and would be prohibited. The rabbis never claimed that any of the laws they were created are categorized as Torah law. They only recognize them as rabbinic laws, which God explicitly commanded them to do in the Torah. So again, that answers the question of, the rabbis making... No, God told the rabbis to make stuff, and why is it not adding or subtracting? Because they never said it's Torah law, they said it's rabbinic law. Now, I'll tell you where it's violating a Torah law. If someone, let's say, for example, ate chicken and dairy by accident, yes, they might have violated a rabbinic law, but they didn't violate any Torah law. But if someone says, the rabbi said this, to not eat dairy and meat, I'm not listening to the rabbis. They violated a Torah law. Why? Because there's a Torah law to listen to the rabbis, right? Lo sasur. There's a positive and negative commandment in the Torah. Out of the 613 commandments, there's 2 commandments. There's a positive to listen to the rabbis and a negative to if you violate and not go against and not listen to the Sanhedrin. Again, when I say rabbis, I'm talking about rabbis of the Sanhedrin. I'm not talking about nowadays, because no one can institute rabbinical laws until we get the Sanhedrin, and the next time we have a Sanhedrin is when Mashiach comes, when there's a Bet HaMikdash. Long story for a different time. Okay, but the idea is what? The idea is, so if someone says, "I'm not listening to this rabbinical commandment. I don't care about the rabbis. I'm only keeping one day of the holiday outside of outside of Israel. I'm going to eat dairy and chicken together. I don't want to listen to the rabbis." Who are they? They violated 2 Torah laws, a positive and negative commandment. But that's for that. But if they actually eat the dairy and chicken, they violated just the rabbinic law. So only when they rebel against the fact that the rabbis did it, not if they did it by, again, if you accidentally eat chicken and dairy, or even if you had a desire and you're not, if you're doing it because you don't want to listen to the rabbis, then you violate. But if you're not doing it because of that, then you don't violate that sin from the Torah of not listening to the rabbis. Okay, that's the idea. I know it's a little bit complicated, but fine. Now, what is the purpose of fences of the rabbis instituted? Okay, so we have. Okay, let's go for see how much time we have left. Okay, let's continue. Okay, what is the purpose of the fences the rabbis instituted? Imagine a person has a severe and life-threatening allergy to peanuts. If the person does not take extra precautions, it is very likely that he will ultimately be exposed, and his life would be on the line sooner or later. Therefore, these high-risk individuals make boundaries for themselves, such as not allowing anyone to bring peanuts into their home, or avoiding foods that may even have a 0.01% chance of containing any trace of peanuts. Why? Because their life is on the line. Similarly, when we realize that the commandments, the mitzvot of the Torah, are given by God Himself, and our lives depend on them, our eternities, and it makes absolute sense for the rabbis of the Sanhedrin to have made boundaries for our benefit, in order to protect us from ever failing and to help us keep on the right path. Only once the Sanhedrin instituted a law, such as when King Solomon and his court instituted the commandment of Nitilat Yadayim, washing hands before eating certain foods, God puts a stamp of approval on this ruling. As a result, the word of King Solomon, or any other court that and his Supreme Court, or any other court that instituted a rabbinical commandment, can now be considered the will of God, and the law must be kept by all Jews. So again, if the rabbis of the Sanhedrin say we got to keep Passover, we got to keep we got to keep Hanukkah, we got to keep Purim, we got to say Hallel, we got to say blessings before we eat, we got to do Nitilat Yadayim, the laws of Yichud, of not secluding yourself with certain women who are forbidden to you. All these rabbinical laws, what we call them, we got to listen to them. Why? Because God put His stamp of approval. This is my Sanhedrin. I told them to make these rabbinical laws. And I put my stamp of approval on what they say. And you got to listen to them, because I'll give you an example. It's like a king. If let's say Trump tells Pence. Who's I forgot his. No, it's not Pence. I forgot the vice president's name. Whatever. But if Trump tells his vice president, okay, I forgot his name, but if he tells the vice president that, I'm giving you permission to, I'm putting you in charge to make a, fence around my laws, and Trump puts his stamp of approval, that's it. If you go against the vice president, you go against Trump, you go against the president. The idea is that it's like a king telling his servant, so you got to listen to this. If you, by listening to the servant, you're listening to the king. Now, what I want to say also is that, let's see here. Without the rabbinical laws, let's talk about, let's take example for Shabbat. I just want to give you this example that I read in a book called 39 Malacha. What a beautiful example that how rabbinic laws, literally, if it wasn't for the rabbinic laws, there would be no Judaism today. Let's talk about Shabbat, for example. Shabbat, there's so many things we do on Shabbat that are rabbinical, but if it wasn't for these rabbinical laws, there would be no Shabbat anymore. Okay, I'll give you an example. If it wasn't for, the law of, there's a law in Shabbat called Amira La'akum. Okay, there's a rabbinic prohibition to, you're not allowed to ask a non-Jew, right? There's obviously certain exceptions to the rule. If there's a sick person, whatever, I'm not going to go into the details. But generally speaking, you're not allowed to ask a non-Jew to violate Shabbat for you. So if you want to cook food on Shabbat, you can't tell the non-Jew, hey, cook this for me on Shabbat. That's a sin, a rabbinic law. Now, according to the Torah, you're allowed to do that. You could ask a non-Jew to break Shabbat. But the rabbis, the Sanhedrin said, no. If you're going to be asking the non-Jew to do it, to turn on the lights, then what's going to happen to your Shabbat? You're going to ask the non-Jew, okay, turn on the TV for me, turn on, cook me food. Oh, let's go to business. I'm going to stand behind you and you write everything for me. You take the money, right? You do all that for me. And what's going to happen? There's not going to be Shabbat anymore. Why? Because you're not keeping to the rabbinic law. The rabbinic law of not asking a non-Jew to break Shabbat is protecting you from why? And what's eventually going to happen? What are you going to do? First of all, the spirit of Shabbat is going to be destroyed. You're going to be going to work on Shabbat because you're just going to tell the non-Jew to do everything. That's number one. Number two, if you're already asking the non-Jew, you know what you're going to say? If I'm asking him, I might as well do it myself and break it. So the idea is they made that fence. Imagine if there wasn't that fence. Imagine if it wasn't for that, there'd probably be no Shabbat today. Why? That fence of not asking a non-Jew to violate Shabbat for you protected Shabbat. I'll give you another fence. According to the Torah, you're allowed to buy and sell on Shabbat. I can go to a store, get money, and buy stuff and sell things. That's not a Torah prohibition. That's only a rabbinical prohibition. So imagine that. Imagine if it wasn't for the rabbis, people would go on Shabbat and go buy, sell this, that. So the only reason they're not doing that is because there's a rabbinical prohibition. Some people think it's a Torah prohibition. It's not. It's a rabbinical prohibition. And the idea is that it keeps Shabbat. It keeps the sanctity. If it wasn't for these rabbinical laws, there would be no Shabbat. Everybody would be working. Everybody would be telling their non-Jew to turn on the TV. There would be no spirit. Now, because of that, we have Shabbat, no one goes to work, people stay off their phones, people don't watch TV, they focus on their family, they get a spiritual detox. Like if it wasn't for, or muksa, for example, if you're able to pick up your phone, pick up your pen, you're gonna, you're gonna pick up your computer, you're gonna pick up heavy, there's so many of these Torah, the rabbinic prohibitions that save us from, destroying Shabbat. And without these, there would be no Shabbat. So that's the idea. And obviously we have to listen to them because, like I said before, God told us you have to listen to the rabbis. So if you don't listen to the rabbis and do these rabbinical laws of not asking, you're not allowed to ask a goy, you're not allowed to touch a muksa. If you don't do that, you're obviously going against God. But I'm just saying, if it wasn't for the rabbis, there would be no, for the Sanhedrin and these, rabbinical laws, there'd be no, the laws of the Torah would be gone by today. But you see the idea from that Shabbat example. Fine. Now, let's continue a little bit more and we'll finish. When the rabbis of the Sanhedrin made protective laws for us, they were carrying out the task that they've been instructed to do by the one who gave us his Torah, God himself. Hence, we can appreciate the idea that a very large part of the Talmud is focused on the laws that are totally from the rabbis, Midarabanan. This is no small matter. These laws endear us to Hashem, they keep us on the right track, protect us from potentially making terrible mistakes, and we are proud to uphold them. All rabbinic laws are sanctioned by the Creator himself. The Sanhedrin was commanded to make such laws, and we have been commanded by the Torah to abide by them. The Masorah, the teaching passed down generation to generation from Moses of the oral Torah, was eventually deposited in the Mishnah and Talmud, and ever since that time, their authority has been universally accepted by the entire Jewish people. Neither the Mishnah nor Talmud ever intended to originate new laws. They merely created written versions of what had previously been transmitted orally. Okay, fine. Now, I'm going to go to page 98. I want to get to denominations of Judaism. Okay, so whoever is on the Zoom and has to go, but I'm going to finish this, okay? Nowadays, since we do not have the Sanhedrin, no one is allowed to create rabbinical laws or annul any previous laws. Okay? So meaning we don't have a Sanhedrin nowadays. So we can't make new rabbinical laws and we can't annul the previous ones. This even includes the greatest rabbis of our generation and all the rabbis who ever came after the Sanhedrin. as their greatness does not even come near the greatness of the earlier rabbis of the Sanhedrin who had that authority. Although this is the case, in every generation, there are certain rabbis who, because of their great scholarship and piety, are generally accepted as the religious leaders and leading authorities. As it is written in the Torah, Deuteronomy 17, verse 10, you shall observe all they decide for you. Meaning Hashem told us that there's going to be leaders in every generation and you got to listen to them. Although this commandment relates specifically to the Sanhedrin, it also applies to the religious leaders of each generation. Just as a religious leader, again, a big rabbi, we call them the Gedolim, the big rabbis, Rabbi Ovadia, Rav Chaim Kanievsky, all these big rabbis. Just as religious leaders must be outstanding in wisdom and scholarship, so must he be distinguished in piety and observance. Okay? Meaning you can't have if there's some leader of the Jewish people, some rabbi, and you see he's not keeping the laws of the Torah, then he obviously can't be a leader. Okay? It is thus written, they seek the Torah from his lips, for he's an angel of the Lord of hosts. Malachi 2, verse 7. This is interpreted to mean that we should only seek to learn Torah from a rabbi who resembles an angel in holiness and piety. If a person is not outstanding in piety and observance, like keeping mitzvot and actually being serious with his mitzvah observance, he is not worthy of the prestige and authority of a religious leader, no matter how great his scholarship. You could be the biggest genius, you can know the entire Talmud, over 2,500 pages, you can know the entire Mishnah. But if you are not keeping to it, you're not pious in your mitzvah observance, you're not actually keeping the Torah mitzvah, the commandments, not only studying Torah, but learning the mitzvah, fixing your bad character traits, helping other people, you're not doing those things, you cannot, even if you're the greatest guy in scholarship, you know everything, but you can't be a leader. Additionally, okay, and almost done. Additionally, this authority must have had a rabbi who himself was a part of the train of transmission all the way to Moses, who received it from God. Okay? Meaning your rabbi and his rabbi, rabbi, all the way, your teacher, right? Again, it could be your father, it could be anybody who knows Torah, but I'm just talking about rabbis just to make it easier. Rabbi means teacher. So your teacher, rabbi, right? It all the way has to be, he has to be in the train of transmission all the way to Moses, who received it from God. To emphasize the importance of this, let's say you had a guy who learned how to perform a surgery from a textbook. Okay? As smart as he is, you would never trust him when it comes to the point of taking action in the surgery room. You would only go to a surgeon who was trained by another surgeon who had years of training in medical school. In every generation, our Torah leaders had years and years of intense Torah learning under their belt, in addition to being connected to a rabbi who was connected to the unbroken chain of transmission of the Torah from God to Moses. So if you have a rabbi and he's just a book rabbi and he never, learned at yeshiva, he never was tapped into the oral Torah, he just, he's a YouTube rabbi. The only thing he did, he learned all his Torah from YouTube videos. Again, even in that case, you're learning from rabbis who learn from their rabbis. But the idea is you can, if you're learning Torah, it must be you're learning it from somebody who's connected to the chain. Right? So it's very, very important, not just to, obviously, of course, you can learn online, you can read books yourself, but also to be connected to an actual rabbi who will teach you. Someone who has learned from his rabbis, learned from his rabbi all the way to Moses, because a lot of Torah wisdom, it's very hard to just read it from books. You need somebody to explain it to you. You read the black and white text, maybe you're subject to interpretation, maybe you don't really understand what it's saying. It's much different when you're hearing it from that. That's why it's very, very important to have a rabbi, to connect yourself to a rabbi, okay? And who is connected all the way back. Fine. Now we're concluding this section. In conclusion, we saw that the rabbinical laws have the full backing of the Creator. Again, rabbis can determine Torah law. If there's a doubt about Torah law, you go to the Sanhedrin. Again, nowadays it's harder because we don't have that, so you go with your rabbi. So if your rabbi in that topic holds, based off his knowledge, Hashem says, okay, you go with your rabbi of your the rabbi you pick, aseh lecha rav, right? That's what the oral Torah says. But the idea is, we saw that the rabbinical laws have the full backing of the Creator. It is indeed correct that God never explicitly commanded us to light Hanukkah candles, read the Megillah, or refrain from muktzah on Shabbat. Nevertheless, God did command the Sanhedrin to use their judgment to make such laws for us and designate them with the task of making festivals around the Torah. Right? So He designated the rabbis to do that, the Sanhedrin, and the chief, okay? In other words, we have been commanded by God to abide by the laws as if God Himself gave it to us at Mount Sinai. So just like you have to keep Torah laws, you got to keep rabbinical laws, because that all falls under listening to the rabbis, which is the Torah law, and fine. From the above, we can see that rabbinical laws have full authority of God behind them, as much as the Torah, the laws of the Torah itself, and therefore we are obligated to keep them. It's no different than a king of a country. I said this before. It's no different than a king of a country who gives authority to one of his advisors to institute laws. Once the advisor institutes a law, the king gives a stamp of approval, and the entire country has to now keep this new law. By and large, the purpose of these laws is to act as preventative measures or fences, because they serve as a protective fence around the laws of the Torah. When we analyze these laws properly, we will find out that each rabbinic prohibition was made either to help us avoid transgressing a Torah sin or somehow enhance our service of God. Okay, last paragraph, we're going to finish. Unfortunately, as history shows, all Jews who have diverged from the path of Torah, specifically the oral tradition, meaning they stopped keeping the oral laws, right? The Mishnah and the Talmud, they stopped keeping the laws in that, the rabbinical laws, the customs, right? So all the Jews who diverged from the path of the Torah, all the things I just mentioned, eventually stopped keeping the Torah and its commandments altogether, have assimilated out of the Jewish people, and sadly are no longer with us today. Anybody who is still Jewish today has to give a huge thanks to their ancestors for their steadfast and loyal devotion to the study of Torah and the observance of all mitzvot, Torah and rabbinical mitzvot. For all these reasons, if we want to stay Jewish and we want our descendants to be Jewish, we must meticulously observe the entire Torah, both the oral and written Torahs, again in the rabbinical laws in the oral Torah, and we must also recognize the greatness and listen to the great rabbis of each and every generation. With that being said, we see that these laws endear us to Hashem, they keep us on the right track, protect us from terrible mistakes, and we are proud to uphold them. Now, I'm reading the footnote on page 98, and we'll finish there. For more information on the subject of the oral law, rabbinical laws, and machloket, disagreements, and how the oral Torah was transmitted throughout the generation, throughout the generations, meaning how there's no broken telephone. Since these topics require much more information and are beyond the scope of this book, we recommend you read the book The Unbroken Chain by Rabbi David Saperman. We also recommend reading the book Why I Listen to the Rabbis by Rabbi Moshe Zellman. These books do an excellent job of explaining the validity of the oral Torah and rabbinic law. You can find these books on Amazon. So, bottom line of what I just said right now, just this last point, there's a lot to say on this topic. Again, so we have to talk about how, why there's machloket, why there's arguments, we have to talk about that. I think I mentioned that before of rabbinical laws, oral laws. If you want to learn more about there's no broken telephone, how it got passed down generation to generation and didn't get lost, read the book. You can find them on Amazon, Unbroken Chain, and Why I Listen to the Rabbis. So you can see in the book if you want more details. But the idea is, we're going to, just to end off with the last point, all the people throughout the generations, let's call them, the Siddukim, the Sadducees, the Karaites, the Reformed, the Conservative. We're going to actually talk about that. We're going to get to that. That's the next section on the denominations of Judaism. But the idea is, everybody who veered off the path of the Torah Jew, the Jew who studies Torah, believes in the 13 principles of faith, keeps the mitzvot, works on his character traits, helps other people. That idea of being a Torah Jew, okay, we call it Orthodox Judaism nowadays because, whatever, I'll explain why that, in the next class, why that's the case, why they call us Orthodox. But the idea is, whoever keeps Orthodox Judaism, those people are still in the game. Those people still are here today. They didn't assimilate. But anybody who veered off the path of Orthodox, Reform, because whatever, all these, groups, Sadducees, Karaites, they're not here today. Why? Because that's what keeps us Judaism. These are the fences that the rabbis made. That's why we're in the game. So thank you for listening. We're going to continue on that topic next time, and take care.